This is Land of Havilah, Leviticus 6. Yahweh said in chapter 5, if an Israelite sinned in a holy thing, he should present a trespass offering. Now he'll give some examples of trespasses on the holy that require a trespass offering. Verse 1. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, If anyone sins and commits a trespass against Yahweh and deals falsely with his neighbor in a matter of deposit or of bargain or of robbery, or has oppressed his neighbor, or has found that which was lost and dealt falsely therein, and swearing to a lie, in any of these things that a man does, sinning therein, then it shall be, if he sinned and is guilty, he shall restore that which he took by robbery, or the thing which he's gotten by oppression, or the deposit which was committed to him, or the thing which he found, or anything about which he's sworn falsely, he shall restore it, even in full, and shall add a fifth part more to it. He shall return it to him to whom it belongs in the day of his being found guilty. He shall bring his trespass offering to Yahweh, a ram without defect from the flock, according to your estimation, for a trespass offering to the priest. The priest shall make atonement for him before Yahweh, and he'll be forgiven concerning whatever he does to become guilty. Comment in verses 2, 4, and 5, Yahweh listed various kinds of theft and fraud. In verse 3, it became a holy matter because when someone called him out on it, he swore he didn't do it. The moment he swore it, he made it a holy matter. Yahweh perked up his ears and got involved with it on a deeper level the moment he made the oath. In verse 6, as Yahweh already said in the last chapter concerning theft and fraud, the guilty party should make restitution plus 20%. In verse 5, he should pay up the same day he's found guilty. Then he needs to make it right by God with a ram for trespass offering. Yahweh will forgive him in verse 7. Now, coming for the rest of the chapter and all the next chapter, at first glance it seems that Yahweh's unorganized, that he's skipping around with more details about the burnt, meal, peace, sin, and trespass offerings, details that he should have already provided. But then we realize he's being very organized because he's addressing what to do with the leftovers of each offering. First up, the burnt offering. It was to be wholly burned except the skin and blood, but even the next morning there'll be some leftovers sitting on the altar that just won't burn. Verse 8. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Command Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the law of the burnt offering. The burnt offering shall be on the hearth on the altar all night until the morning, and the fire of the altar shall be kept burning on it. The priest shall put on his linen garment, and he shall put on his linen breeches upon his body, and he shall remove the ashes from where the fires consumed the burnt offering on the altar, and he shall put them beside the altar. He shall take off his garments and put on other garments, and carry the ashes outside the camp to a clean place. The fire on the altar shall be kept burning on it, it shall not go out. And the priest shall burn wood on it every morning, and he shall lay the burnt offering in order upon it, and shall burn on it the fat of the peace offerings. Fire shall be kept burning on the altar continually, it shall not go out. Comment in verses 9, 12, and 13, Keep the fire going on the altar day and night, it should burn continually, it shall not go out. The fire of service in our soul should be continual. In verses 9 and 10, burnt offerings should stay on the fire all night. In the morning, the priest should put on his sanctified linen garments, go to the altar, remove whatever's left of any burnt offerings, change into his regular garments, take the remains of the burnt offerings outside the camp, not to a garbage dump, but to a clean place, and put the remains there. The animal represents Christ. The body of the animal represents Christ's body. Even the remains should be treated with respect. It's a foreshadowing of Christ's full sacrifice of himself. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus treated Christ's remains with full respect. We should treat the memory of it all with full respect. Coming up, we need to remember from chapter 2 that a person could present a meal offering raw or cooked. In the raw form, it was fine flour seasoned with salt, oil poured on top, and garnished with frankincense. The priest burned a handful called the memorial portion, put that part on the fire, and kept the rest. It turns out coming up that this is probably what the priest will use when they bake the showbread. Verse 14. This is the law of the meal offering. The sons of Aaron shall offer it before Yahweh before the altar. He shall take from there his handful of the fine flour of the meal offering, and of its oil, and all the frankincense which is on the meal offering, and shall burn it on the altar for a pleasant aroma, as its memorial to Yahweh. That which is left of it Aaron and his sons shall eat. It shall be eaten without yeast in a holy place. They shall eat it in the court of the tent of meeting. It shall not be baked with yeast. I've given it as their portion of my offerings made by fire. It's most holy as the sin offering and as the trespass offering. Every male among the children of Aaron shall eat of it as their portion forever throughout your generations from the offerings of Yahweh made by fire. Whoever touches them shall be holy. Comment in chapter 2, Yahweh was clear that any meal offering, cooked or raw, was most holy. For purposes of disposal, according to Moses, this meant that the leftovers of the meal offering shouldn't leave the court, Leviticus 10:12 and 13. In verse 16, the priest should eat the remains of it in a holy place, in the court, a holy place probably also including the tent. In the case of the raw offering, Yahweh is implying in verse 17 that the priest will cook it. This might be what they used to make the showbread. In verse 18, no one else should even touch the remains of the meal offering. There was a difference between holy and most holy. If something was holy, a priest could take it home and share it with his family, if they were ceremonially clean, Leviticus 22. But anything most holy had to stay in the court, Leviticus 10. Speaking of the most holy, what else did that include? It was basically all the objects inside the fence, including the tabernacle and all the objects that were in there, Exodus 26:33. The bronze altar, the bronze basin, the utensils that went with all these objects, Exodus 30:29. And the finely powdered incense for the golden altar, Exodus 30:36. None of these things should leave the tent grounds like the most holy offering shouldn't leave the tent grounds. Everything inside the court was a picture of earth meeting heaven. When a person first went in the gate, he saw the altar and animals being killed beside it because atonement comes first. Then moving closer to the tent, he saw the basin. The priest washed their hands and feet in the basin daily. If they tried to enter the tent without washing, they would die. Exodus 30:19 and 29. The basin was made of melted down bronze mirrors, Exodus 38:8. Mirrors are for self-examination. The basin represents our daily examination of ourselves, our hunger and thirst for righteousness, and it represents God's daily cleansing. Jesus said, someone who's bathed only needs his feet washed, John 13:10. The wholesale bathing came at the altar with Christ's sacrifice and atonement, but the continual sprucing up comes at the basin with ongoing self-examination and God's ongoing cleansing. Then moving through the door of the tent, we're still on earth, but we're communicating with God, as symbolized by the golden altar of incense. Our prayers go up as incense, and God communicates with us, as symbolized by the light of the menorah, and He supplies us, as symbolized by the bread on the table. Then finally we enter the most holy place. We were already in God's presence in the holy place, but in the most holy place we're in His direct presence, which symbolizes heaven or God coming to earth. So we can see Leviticus as a dry technical manual for priests, but that's only on the surface. If the surface is all we want to see, that's all we'll get. But the idea is to get past the technical into the meaning of it and the execution of it for ourselves, because our ultimate goal is to wind up in the presence of the glory. Verses 17 and 18 we just read begin to address the disposal of the sin and trespass offerings. We must remember that the sin offering involved the fatty parts going to the fire, and coming later the same will apply to the trespass offering, that the fatty parts will go to the fire. Most of the sin and trespass offerings will be left over. The point of verses 17 and 18 is that the leftovers of these are most holy, like the leftovers of the meal offering. Directions for disposal of the sin and trespass leftovers are coming later, but we already have our clue that the remains of them won't leave the court, and the priest will eat them since they're most holy, like the meal offering. In verse 18, a male among the children of Aaron is another term for priest. Throughout the generations of Israel, a person couldn't be a legitimate priest unless his male-to-male ancestry went back to Aaron. Coming up, a special meal offering that applies only to the high priest, It's called the continual meal offering. Beginning the day the priest is anointed, he shall bring a meal offering twice a day and fully consume it on the altar. Verse 19. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, This is the offering of Aaron and of his sons, which they shall offer to Yahweh in the day when he is anointed. 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour for a meal offering perpetually, half of it in the morning and half of it in the evening. It shall be made with oil in a griddle. When it's soaked, you shall bring it in. You shall offer the meal offering in baked pieces for a pleasant aroma to Yahweh. The anointed priest that will be in his place from among the sons of Aaron shall offer it. By statute forever it shall be wholly burned to Yahweh. Every meal offering of a priest shall be wholly burned. It shall not be eaten. Comment, there will be one high priest at a time, and when Yahweh spoke this, it was Aaron. Aaron and his future replacements will bring unleavened bread from the griddle to the altar every morning and evening. All of it will go up to Yahweh. It'll be about 4 cups of flour made into pieces on a griddle and thoroughly soaked with oil. There'll also have to be a little salt mixed in, because the salt of the covenant shall not be missing from any meal offering. Again, the salt represents the permanence of the covenant. The high priest represents the Messiah, so morning and evening the high priest is emulating Jesus' continual service by bringing this offering again and again. Jesus said, quote, The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, end quote. Now addressing the remains of the sin offering, which is the entire body minus the fatty parts and blood. Verse 24. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and to his sons, saying, This is the law of the sin offering. In the place where the burnt offering is killed, the sin offering shall be killed before Yahweh. It is most holy. The priest who offers it for sin shall eat it. It shall be eaten in a holy place in the court of the tent of meeting. Whatever shall touch its flesh shall be holy. When there is any of its blood sprinkled on a garment, you shall wash that on which it was sprinkled in a holy place. But the earthen vessel in which it was boiled shall be broken, and if it's boiled in a bronze vessel, it shall be scoured and rinsed in water. Every male among the priests shall eat of it. It's most holy. Comment in verse 2, Kill the sin offering at the same place as the burnt offering, meaning on the north side of the altar, Leviticus 1:11. In verse 26, the priest who offers the sin offering shall eat it. In verse 29, every priest shall eat it, probably meaning that the priest who offered it should eat some, and any other priest might also participate. This is a picture of Christ taking on our sin, because for the sin offering, the sinner laid his hand and transferred his sin to the animal. Therefore, the animal carried his sin. Now that the priest is eating the animal, he's taking on the sin, which is a picture of Christ. God won't punish the priest for taking on the sin because the priest is holy, just as God didn't punish Christ because he was holy. In verse 26, the priest will eat the animal in a holy place, which is the court in verse 26, or the holy place inside the tent, Leviticus 10:18. From chapter 4, a sin offering can be a goat or lamb, which would be a lot to eat, and the goats and lambs are becoming nonstop sometimes. It won't be physically possible for the priest to completely consume them every time, but from Leviticus 10:16-19, it seems they should at least eat some and burn the rest. In verses 27-29, since the sin offering was most holy, there's even a protocol for the pot in which the priest boils it, or the garment on which its blood might splatter. In chapter 4, if a priest or the whole congregation sinned, the sin offering's a little different. It should be a young bull, and it should be processed differently by A, taking some of the blood into the tent, and B, taking the remains outside the camp for burning. So obviously the priest won't be eating that. With that in mind, verse 30, no sin offering of which any of the blood is brought into the tent of meeting to make atonement in the holy place shall be eaten, it shall be burned with fire. Comment, in the foreshadowing that Yahweh constantly keeps in his mind, he doesn't want the priest to eat the bull. Why? Because in the case of a bull for the sin of a priest, this would be a picture of Christ consuming his own sin, which would be nonsensical because he had no sin. Therefore, don't eat the bull because Jesus didn't take on his own sin. Or in the case of a bull for the whole congregation, If the priest ate that, it would be a picture of Christ taking on the sin of the whole world, which he didn't exactly. He took on the sin of individuals. His sacrifice only applies to whoever believes, John 3:16. Therefore, don't eat the bull for the whole congregation, because Jesus didn't take on the sin of the whole congregation. Leviticus 7 is next at landofhavilah.net.